The LA Galaxy are winless to their first 11 matches of the 2025 season. They've been plagued by injuries and have been without their best player in Ricky Puig for the entire year. With this abysmal start to their title defense, many are questioning whether head coach Greg Vanney is on the hot seat or not. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to MLS Moves. Please make sure you like this video down below. Let's try to get 100 likes on this video. Also, make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We're trying to hit 10,000 subscribers by the end of this year. We're a little over 3,000 until we hit our goal. So make sure you subscribe if you haven't already and hit that little bell notification so you never miss any of our videos. To break down what's gone wrong for the LA Galaxy in 2025 and what could come next, I brought on Kevin Baxter of the LA Times. Now, on to the video. Kevin, it's been, I think, like 4 months since you were on the channel. We were previewing the LA Galaxy for the season. They were coming off an MLS Cup win. Things looked really good. They were obviously had some roster turnover that happens with any championship team. They brought in some reinforcements. But honestly, I don't think anyone could have predicted this would be the start 11 games through the 2025 regular season.
Well, how's this? They haven't won since we talked last. So let's start there.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, obviously we're going to get into this, but there's been injuries with this team. But how did this happen?
Well, the injury thing is there's differences between reasons and excuses. An excuse is, when you say we can't win because, and a reason is this happened because. Okay, so it's not really a semantic difference. If you're going to use the injuries as an excuse, every team has injuries. If you're going to say, look, we're having trouble because we have injuries, well, that might be legitimate, but let's kind of drill down on this a little bit. Yeah, the Galaxy have had a ton of injuries. They've had 9 starters who have been injured at one point or another. And the most important player they're missing is Ricky Puig, who was their playmaker, their go-to guy, the guy that made the offense run. Well, you know what? They knew in November that he was out with an ACL and would be out until probably August or September. So they had plenty of time to prepare for this. So you look at the injuries, yeah, that's been a problem, but 8 of the 11 players who started in the MLS Cup final are back on the team, are playing for them right now. So they have the core of the team back. You mentioned they did have to make some changes in the offseason. Every MLS champion has to get that roster under the salary cap. And the reason it becomes difficult for MLS champions is because there are bonuses and other payments that count against that salary cap that happen when you make a long playoff run. New York Red Bulls have the same problem. They didn't win the MLS Cup, but they got to the final. So they had to play a number of bonuses and squeeze guys under too. So the Galaxy made a couple moves, and I think it's fair to look at Will Kuntz, the general manager, and say, wow, he really made this team into an MLS Cup champion. And he did. He took over a team the last full season before he came, won 8 games. They were terrible. He signed 10 of the 14 players who played in the MLS Cup final. They all signed under Will. He was the guy that put that team together. So if it's fair to say he built the champion, it's fair, I think, to look at this and say, what were the decisions he made this offseason that didn't work out, that hurt this team? And there's a couple, there's not a lot, but there's a couple. One is he decided to keep Diego Fagundes and trade Mark Delgado to LAFC. And Mark Delgado is having a great season, sort of quarterbacking LAFC. I think he could have filled that role for the Galaxy. He could have been the Ricky Puig role. The reason Will didn't keep him is he thought Marco Reus, who's a 3-time Bundesliga player of the year, he thought Marco Reus would fill that position. He expected to get a lot of minutes out of Marco Reus. Marco Reus has been a guy who has been hurt so seriously. I found out yesterday the Galaxy seriously considered sitting him down for the season and just shutting him down. Maybe even buying out his contract. He has come back. He's played a little bit, played this last weekend. And we have to talk about that game. Wow, what a wild game in Kansas City. But he played in that game. So the idea was we're going to keep Diego Fagundes. He's more versatile. He can do more things. We're going to get rid of Mark Delgado because Marco Reus is going to fill that role. Well, that really hasn't worked out because Marco Reus has been hurt and there's nobody to fill that role. Mark Delgado would have been the closest guy they would have had. So that's one injury. And then after that, there's just been a series of injuries. From Ed, we talked about Marco Reus. Gabriel Peck's missed a little bit of time. Joseph Paintsell's missed some time. But the big thing hasn't been the injuries because these guys have had they've been serious but somewhat niggling injuries in that no one's out for the season except Ricky Puig. Guys missed a half here or a game there, but they're just not producing. Last year, the Galaxy had 4 players score 4 or 10 or more goals. First time an MLS team has ever had 4 different players with double-digit goals. 2 of the 4 are back. Ricky Puig is hurt. Dejan Joveljic was traded to Sporting Kansas City. The 2 that are back are really the guys that made the team go, which would be Paintsill and Peck. They've combined for 1 goal this season. So here's guys that I think they had 29 goals total last season. They've combined for 1. Now we're 11 games into this season. And so just to recap, as you mentioned at the top, but we didn't really go into the records here. Galaxy are 0-8-3, so they're winless after 11 games. It's the worst start for an MLS team in history. I believe that's it. Worst start. Yes, not streak, but worst start for an MLS team in history. They have company. Montreal has done the same thing this year. The worst start ever for a reigning MLS champion, and the worst start in Galaxy franchise history. So, you really can't say they haven't bottomed out yet, because you can't go below worst.
Well, I think I did a little digging into this. I think the only team that has a worse start is the 2019 Colorado Rapids. They only had 2 points their first 11 games. So they're the only team that has had a worse start. But to be fair, they weren't the defending champions. This wasn't a team that just proved that they were the best team in the league. But that's not the company you're trying to be with when you just come off a championship and everyone thinks that Will Kuntz has helped this team return back to their glory days. And I was thinking about this, Kevin. I've listened to you and Josh on Corner of the Galaxy for many years, and I remember how bad the Kernanolfo experiment was, and how everybody was ready to get their pitchforks out, get him fired and out of town, because he was obviously had big shoes to fill taking over for Bruce Arena, and he didn't even have this bad of a start.
No, what happened with that team, there was a lot going on there. I think Kurt may have been a bad choice as coach, but at that point, Bruce Arena had just left. Chris Klein, who was the team president, kind of took over a little bit some of the general manager duties. It was a sort of a dysfunctional front office. And one of the things that team wanted to do, with Dan Beckerman, the CEO of AEG, the parent company of the Galaxy, a lot of chefs got involved in making that stew. And what they wanted to do is say, we're as smart as Bruce Arena, which no one's really as smart as Bruce Arena. We're as smart as Bruce Arena. We can build this team. And they decided, instead of using high-paid designated players like Robbie Keane, David Beckham, Landon Donovan, they got rid of that in that offseason. They got rid of Steven Gerrard, Robbie Keane, and Landon Donovan all in one fell swoop, and said, we're going to build with the academy. And that proved to be a disastrous decision. It took 7 years for the Galaxy to dig out from that. This one's a little bit different in that, Will Kuntz has proved he's a smart guy. I do think that last year, and we talked about this you mentioned Corner of the Galaxy. We talked about this on our Galaxy podcast last night. When a team wins, and I'm talking about any sport, you have guys that step up, guys that have career years that they've never had before. And I think you had that with the Galaxy. Gabriel Peck is a great player. He's going to play in Europe, but he had his best year ever last year. Maya Yoshida had his best year. Mickey Imani had his best year. Dan Joveljic had his best year. All these guys had their best years at the same time. So now some of them are returning to the mean. They're still really good players, but they're not at the level they were at last year. And so the Galaxy has been set up to play a certain way, to succeed a certain way. And those players just aren't doing it as they did last year. Another example would be John McCarthy. I think he's had a solid season in goal. Hasn't been like last year. Hasn't been an MLS championship season. He's a good goalkeeper. He should be the starter, but it's just not the same as it was last year.
Yeah, and at the beginning of the season, it felt like they tried to force Misevic to be the starting goalkeeper, and they had a lot of issues because I don't know if they've conceded the most goals in MLS, but if they're not, they're very close, probably top 3 most conceded goals in MLS. And I was talking with a friend of mine, Chris Tucker. I think maybe you're familiar with him too.
Yeah.
And we were talking about Maya Yoshida in the offseason, and Maya Yoshida is 37 years old or very close. And it's one of those situations where you'd rather be a year too early to get rid of them than a year too late. And it feels like that's what happened with, you said he kind of came back down to reality or to earth in this season, the way he's played. But that own goal that he had against Sporting Kansas City just absolutely, I think it summed up how this season's going for the LA Galaxy. And this is one of those examples of they probably should have moved off of him, even though you want to try to keep your core team together because they just won MLS Cup. You want to keep as many of those pieces. And he's obviously a leader in the locker room and a leader of men and someone that you want to keep in that environment. But I think that, retrospectively, they should have got rid of Maya Yoshida. This has been He didn't really play very well in 2023, if memory serves me correct, because he signed halfway through the season. He was kind of shaky, but he was settling in. But this is the worst form he's been in since he's been an LA Galaxy player.
Well, he's an interesting guy because he led the MLS in minutes played, if you include playoffs, last season. Captained them to a championship. He was the captain. He was clearly the leader in the locker room, on the field. Was voted Defender of the Year by the media. Just had a great season. Was out of contract, and the Galaxy had to make a decision. Now, he didn't cost a lot. He was under $1 million. He took a pay cut to come back, and as part of the deal, the Galaxy said, "Okay, we'll give you 2 years, but you're going to take this pay cut." And Mayashi was very upset with that. So that was a guy they could have moved off of, but they didn't, and they didn't. And in fact, they traded Jalen Neal instead, a guy who's a young, up and coming, perhaps U.S. national team player. But you mentioned the game in Kansas City with the own goal. The other part of that game is the Galaxy did not give up a shot on goal. Didn't give up a shot, excuse me. They didn't give up a shot of any kind, a shot that missed the net, a shot that went over the net, a shot on target, nothing, no shots. Sporting Kansas City had no shots, but there was an own goal. So the Galaxy lose 1-0. It was the first time in Galaxy's 30-year history they played an entire game without giving up a shot of any kind. It was the first time in MLS history a team has won a game without having a shot. That's where the Galaxy is. And it's funny because Greg Vanney, and we need to sort of talk about his status at some point, but
yes, for sure.
Greg Vanney after the game said, it might have been the best, most complete game we played all season. And it's like, whoa, time out. The best, most complete game you played this season is your 5th shutout in 11 games, and you lose to a team that didn't take a shot, and that's your best game of the season? I mean, the bar is pretty low. Oh, you did mention the goals, too. I wanted to say the 21 goals they've allowed, I believe, is second or third, but their goal differential, minus 13, is worse than the league. And you say, well, how did they win a championship last year and play like that? They did have some defensive issues last year, but they scored so many goals, 69. They scored so many goals that you never noticed the defensive issues. It really didn't matter because they scored so many goals. They might give up 2 goals, but they still win 5-2. So what's the issue there? Now the fact they're not scoring, Christian Ramirez has 4 goals. Nobody else has more than 1. They have 8 goals total. They've been shut out 5 times, as I mentioned. Last season, 4 times all year. So those defensive errors that were there last year and the defensive issues that were there last year are back. Only now you notice them.
Yeah, and as far as Christian Ramirez, I've talked to him numerous times. Very good guy, very productive goal scorer in Major League Soccer. Maybe you disagree with this, but when they signed him, Kevin, I thought it was more of having a reliable depth piece who, if maybe Matías Nascimento did not pan out or maybe took more time to adjust, they had a reliable striker up top between 2 very good wingers, like you said, in Paintsel and Peck, who scored 29 goals, that he would be able to produce or be good enough at least to get him along. But I think when you're relying on Christian Ramirez to start all season, you're kind of putting yourself at I don't want to say risk, but you're setting yourself up for failure. And Matías Nascimento has just not been what I mean. He had some injury concerns when they signed him. Apparently, he very talented, just gets injured a lot. He's been injured for the Galaxy, and when he has played, he really hasn't done what you need him to do, which I'm kind of wondering if, because of how bad things are, they wouldn't consider terminating his loan early and maybe trying another swing and getting another U-22 striker.
I think maybe the jury's out on him a little bit, but I agree with you 100%. When they got Christian Ramirez, it was, this guy will start the beginning of the season because Nascimento's not here. He wasn't there during preseason camp. When he did come in, he was hurt right away. He really hasn't gotten a chance to get his feet under him yet, but they did have high hopes for him. And another guy they signed, another young South American, Luis Sanabria, who came in as U-22 midfielder. He broke his collarbone like right away. I mean, I think the first game. And so they haven't really got to look at those 2 guys. It's difficult for me to say that, yeah, things would be different with those 2 guys because this has been such an epic failure. I don't know if 2 guys would have made a difference. They certainly could have helped, but I totally agree with you on Christian Ramirez. Not so much a depth piece, but maybe a little bit of leadership, a guy that you could put in there and say, you're going to start the first 10 games of the season until our young players get ready, and you feel comfortable with that. He reminds me a little bit of Diego Fagundes, not quite as versatile and maybe not as much of a veteran presence, but a guy that he's not going to hurt you. He's not going to, he's maybe not going to light it up, but he's not going to make dumb mistakes and hurt you. And they had a lot of success with Diego Fagundes. And so I think that kind of influenced Will when he said, yeah, we need we need a depth piece. We need someone that can maybe be a locker room presence and help bring these young kids along. He speaks Spanish, so that's going to help with Nascimento and Luis Sanabria. So I think that was all part of the thinking. But definitely Sanabria, Nascimento, those are young guys. Again, U22 players. You put them together with Julian Alde. You put them together with Gabriel Peck, who's now 23. You got signed for 5. He was signed for 5 years, so 4 years left. Now you got a good core going forward. Certainly Christian Ramirez was in his mid-30s, was not going to be part of that core going forward.
Yeah, and Sanabria, I think they ended up spending somewhere around like $6 to $7 million on him, if I'm not mistaken. So he's locked in there. He's not going anywhere. Now the Nascimento signing obviously has a little bit more flexibility. If they really wanted to, they could terminate it, and it wouldn't be as I don't know how that would work with Tam or Gamble, what they use to bring him in. I know he's a U22 player. I don't know how that would affect the salary cap with terminating a loan early. But that they do have a little bit more flexibility with maybe moving him. And I don't remember if they were the team, because there was that chart that came out a couple months ago that showed every team's available GAM. And I think the Galaxy were very, 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 the cupboard was bare. Like they did not have much GAM, like maybe like 10,000 or something low like that.
Yeah, they have used every penny where they can. And you talk about the start. So 08-3. What's really scary is you keep saying this is going to end. Kansas City was the game it was supposed to end. I know that they made a coaching change and they've gotten kind of good, but the last couple of games they've been tough. But they were having a terrible season. And when you looked on the schedule, you kind of circled that game and said, okay, this is the one where the Galaxy sort of, get off the schneid and start going. You look at what they got coming up. They're playing the Red Bulls this weekend, so that's a rematch of the MLS Cup. It's there in New Jersey, so Red Bulls have revenge in their mind certainly, and they're playing at home. The Galaxy have to make that long trip with a lot of guys who've never made trips that far before. So that game, maybe the Galaxy have a little bit of a chance, but that's going to be a tough one. Then they follow that with Philadelphia in Chester. Philadelphia playing really, really well this year, and then the Galaxy come back and play LAFC at home, and LAFC is playing really well right now. They've really started to hit stride. That is a derby game, so throw the records out. But I mean, you look at those next 3 games, and the Galaxy could be winless through 14.
Well, this is an important, I guess, this is a good way to transition to this. So I want to preface by saying this. Ricky Puig is obviously a very important player. You and I acknowledge that. Anybody who watches the Galaxy knows how important he is to this team. He is the person that makes this whole thing go. But the problem is with the money they've spent. Will Kuntz obviously got a little bit, I don't want to say more money, but he told ownership, hey, you give me this money, I will make this sustainable. We will sell these players, buy new players, sell those players, and it will run on itself. And even without Puig, the fact they can't win a game through 11 is a really bad sign, because it shows that there's a lot of deficiencies on this team, Kevin. But with how bad this team has started, is Greg Vanney on the hot seat? I mean, winless through 11, is there a breaking point, even if the injuries are obviously a big reason why they're not good this year? When does that excuse run dry?
Well, you got to kind of scratch behind the surface on that one. By the way, when they added Peck and Paint Sill and Mickey Amani, they spent $21 million in transfer fees to get those 3 guys in last year. And that's exactly what Will Kuntz told management is that, I'm not going to come and ask you for nickels and dimes every year. I'm going to do this one big move now. We're going to build this team, sign those guys to long-term contracts. Yamani got the shortest one. It was 3 years. The other 2, I think 4 or 5. So that was the plan. But one of the things they did do is they built everything around Ricky Puig. And Will Kuntz told me yesterday, he said, it's like you take Steph Curry, off the Warriors and all of a sudden they're not the same team. Well, one of the problems is the Galaxy have tended to play with Ricky, just give Ricky the ball, feed Ricky the ball, let him do things, let him be the quarterback. It's kind of like, if you think of the NFL, Peyton Manning always used to call plays at the line of scrimmage. The coach would send in a play, but Peyton Manning would do what he wanted. And Ricky kind of had that freedom. And one of the criticisms I've heard, I talked to a lot of people at the Galaxy yesterday. One of the criticisms that I've heard is that Greg Vanney has not really changed the way they play. Greg Vanney says he has, but the feeling from the outside is Greg Vanney really hasn't adapted to his personnel. He's still trying to, rather than saying we don't have Ricky Puig, let's play a different way. He's trying to say, who's the closest person to Ricky Puig? Let's try Surreal. Let's see if he can do that. Let's try Fagundes. Let's see if he can. The idea of going into the season with Marco Royce filling that role tells you right there they didn't account for Ricky's absence. on one hand, the Galaxy want to say Ricky Puig is a once in a generation MLS player, which you can make that argument. But then if that's your argument, you can't turn around and say, but for the first 11 months, we're going to use Marco Royce. He's going to be that guy. If he's once in a generation, you can't replace him. So, but to answer your question, Greg Vanney is on the hot seat because you can't change the entire roster. You can look at it and say, one of the things we talked about this week on our podcast was, look, Greg Vanney has done everything but suit up and try to score himself. And maybe that's the next step. But clearly, you can criticize Greg and his game plans and maybe his lineups. He's used 11 different lineups in 11 different games. He's trying to make some changes. You can maybe criticize some of his decisions, but the players are clearly the ones that have failed at this point. And you can't change all the players. So maybe you do need to change the coach. He's been here 4 years. Maybe guys have gotten tired of hearing that message from the same voice. Maybe there would be something that came with a change in coaches. He was supposed to be out of contract this year, but he had an extension that triggered when he made the playoffs last year. So that got him through this year. His agent, Ron Waxman, has been negotiating a new contract with the Galaxy all season. The Galaxy told me that talks are not going well, that Greg and Ron Waxman are holding out for apparently a multi-year deal, probably at a raise, and they're just not reading the room. Right now, the Galaxy are winless through 11 games. I think they had a lot of leverage to get him a contract after he won the MLS Cup, and I think that's when they should have struck. I mean, if I'm Ron Waxman, I look at it and say, my guy just won an MLS Cup, just won 19 games, tied the franchise record, did all these wonderful things, but he's going to be missing his best player. I better get this contract done before the season starts because who knows? Well, they're still holding out for that big money contract and those multi-year deals. I just don't think he's going to get it. And I think at some point, if they're going to hold out for something really big and a deal's not going to get done, what's to stop the Galaxy saying, look, we're going to start working on 2026 right now. We're going to get rid of the coach. We're going to start all over again. If Greg Vanney is the guy they want, but he's just not going to come play and negotiate, maybe they do move on. And I don't know how long you wait. Right now, they're, I think, 13 points out of a playoff spot. I think they're 23 points out of first place in the conference. They're going to be mathematically eliminated from the conference race by the end of this month. So at some point, they do have to move on. And do they decide that Greg Vanney is the guy that's going to help them rebuild again? Or do they decide, look, we're not going to sign him for a multi-year deal if this is what he wants, based on this season? So we'll see what happens. I think the ball is in their court right now.
Well, I had a gentleman named Michael McCall who covers Vancouver on a couple of weeks ago, and he had told me he had heard that that the Toronto FC were trying to get Greg Vanney to come back because they haven't made the playoffs since he left, and they've had 4 different coaches. But he said he wanted to stay with the Galaxy, and he recommended them hiring Robin Fraser, which was his lead assistant at Toronto for many years when he was there. So that's their coach. I can see a scenario where maybe if because they're one of the worst teams in MLS too, they only have 1 win this year, Toronto FC. I think that a reunion is in the making if this doesn't go well for the Galaxy, which it looks like it's not going to. But Kevin, if the Galaxy don't win one of their next 2 or 3 games, I think you said the third game is the LAFC. So if they
Correct.
don't win their next 2 games and then they also lose to LAFC, and we know how big that rivalry has become. It's the biggest rivalry in MLS, and it's a big deal. Even when the Galaxy aren't really good, they still normally perform pretty well in those games. So if he is winless in 14 matches, I just find it very hard that they don't make a change because at a certain point, even though Will Kuntz has won a championship for this team, ownership's going to say, hey, look, we gave you the keys to this. You haven't won a game in 14 matches. Injuries are, there are injuries, but there's no way that this MLS Cup winning team is so bad that they can't win a single match in 14 games.
Well, yeah, again, and go back to, the fault really lies with the players at this point. But I mean, you brought up a lot of good stuff there. One of the things the Galaxy did sort of whisper to me is that, Greg is being so intransigent in these contract talks. He may have something else lined up, which kind of fits in with what you're talking about. I know he enjoyed his time in Vancouver. I think his family liked it. I could see him going back. I could also see him staying. He played for the Galaxy. He was on the original Galaxy team. He's Galaxy through and through. When he came back, the idea was he was going, and he brought all of his coaches, Dan Kalishman and Kevin Hartman was here, but all of his old guys that he played with at the Galaxy, and they were going to bring back the Galaxy model. But when you look at Greg again, his fourth season, he's really only had the one good season. He did make the playoffs, but he's really only had the one good season. So you can look at that and say, well, he didn't really do what he came to do, what we expected him to do. Yes, he won an MLS Cup, but he really didn't rebuild the brand. But there's a lot going on here as far as coaches go. Steve Cherundolo has announced that he's leaving at the end of the season, so there'll be an opening at LAFC. Ante Razov is there. Mark Dos Santos, who coached at Vancouver, been a head coach and at Montreal in the NASL days, I believe. Those are guys with head coaching experience. So you've got, if Greg's seat were all of a sudden become empty, you got two head coaching vacancies in LA at the end of the season. A couple of good candidates for those jobs. Someone has whispered, would Greg Vanney go over and coach at LAFC? Not off of this season. He's not going to go to a winning team. He, as you said, it's going to have to be like a Toronto, a rebuilding team. So maybe that's the reason he's holding out. Maybe the deal is, look, give us everything we want and we'll stay. Fall a little bit short, we're going back to Toronto. We have another option.
Yeah, I mean, he's really only had like you said, the one good season, and that's Will Kuntz came in. That was his first full season in charge as a general manager. So like I credit Will Kuntz more to their success than Greg Vanney. I think he was just kind of along for the ride. Not to say he was bad, because obviously he had to do. I mean, I don't think he completely lucked into an MLS Cup win, but I do think it was more about the roster and what Will Kuntz was able to assemble. And I just believe, Kevin, I honestly believe, and we'll get into like what you think will go down, what will happen down the stretch of the season, but I'd like to think there's a breaking point. Everybody has a breaking point. And if they're not able to figure this out, even if Greg Vanney, it is the injuries that have just absolutely decimated them. I mean, like you said, you can't fire the players, but you can fire the coach.
Well, and you got to look, I think you have to look a little bit about who stands the most to lose from this. I mean, Will Kuntz last year was the golden boy. He was the guy that could do no wrong. And he got plaudits from everywhere, especially from me, a lot of plaudits from me about how he turned. Because I watched the poor years. I watched the fan boycott and all that. And Will Kuntz came in and changed everything. And he told me, my ultimate destination is I want to be a general manager in Europe. I want to be in the Premier League. Well, guess what? If you're winless in MLS, you're not going to the Premier League. So at some point, Will Kuntz, his reputation is going to hurt. When he started this season, it was almost like, why are you back in MLS? You should be at Manchester City or something. You just kind of had that feeling. Well, his reputation, it gets tarnished every time they lose another game because he's tied to this. So there's a lot of egos involved in every sport, but certainly, at this level with the Galaxy, a big major club, coming off a championship season, Greg Vanney has an ego. He wants to do well. He has a reputation to defend. So does Will Kuntz. And you wonder how much is that going to play in it? Is Will Kuntz going to give Greg Vanney everything that he needs to sort of pull out of this? Or is Will Kuntz going to say, this is embarrassing me. I'm not going to Europe based on an MLS team that goes, 4-31 or 4-30 or whatever. At some point that may be part of the motivation too.
Yeah. And I just believe that if you look at any other top team in the world, and I believe you're a Manchester City fan, if memory serves me correct. And now Pep Guardiola is probably the one exception to this rule, but any other team in the world, if they won the championship and the following season they were winless in their first 11, I can guarantee you that 99.9% of those teams would probably make a coaching change at that point. Now, in MLS, you probably get a little more slack just because it's a different league. And obviously, he has a history with the league. It's just a little bit different. But my prediction is, and I want to get your prediction on what you think the rest of the season is going to transpire for the Galaxy, or what's going to happen. But my prediction is if he doesn't win a game between now and El Tráfico, the first installment of this year, he will be gone after that match.
I think that's a fair guess, and it may not be the El Tráfico match though. We discussed this here in LA, and the idea of, yes, I could very well see them winless after 14 games, the 14th being El Tráfico. But do you let your arch rival beat you and then say you beat us and that's so embarrassing, we're going to change coaches? No, there is part of that rivalry thing that steps back and say, you didn't hurt me, I'm fine, and you wait another game. Maybe the decision is made after that game, but you don't actually fire the coach. The problem with, what I think a lot of people miss in all sports is when you fire a coach, that's only half the equation. The other half is finding somebody better to come in, or at least somebody different. And so when you look around MLS, no one's going to bring Peter Vermees back. So who else do you have? Well, Jim Curtin's still out there as far as I know.
Yeah.
Jim Curtin would be a good guy. But the deeper we get into the season, we've already had 2 teams change coaches. The Galaxy would be the third if they did pull the string here. Jim Curtin's not going to be around forever. He's going to come in with some baggage. He's going to want to sort of run the system the way he did in Philadelphia. He's going to play a different kind of style, but he's the best coach out there right now. And does that figure into this too? The Galaxy is not going to go. They're not going to go the Kurt Onalfa route again. They're not going to get a beginning coach. LAFC just really did a great job with Cherundolo, but they knew what they were getting. That really wasn't a rookie coach. The Galaxy are going to have to go out and get somebody with some heft. And, right now, Jim Curtin's that guy. So does that impact it too? Do they make a move maybe a little earlier than they'd love to because they want to, they want to get the best guy that's out there? Right now, I think Greg Vanney is probably better than just about anybody else you can offer, with the exception of maybe Jim Curtin.
Yeah. It will be interesting to see how that what happens maybe when Ricky Puig comes back and if he even survives. Now, when we talked in the offseason, we thought maybe July or August is when Puig would probably be back. Is there any update on when he might be making his reappearance or playing again for the Galaxy?
Yeah, he's in Barcelona rehabbing right now. The expectation is he will come back early in the summer, late June, early July, to be around the club and to finish his rehab. That's another interesting decision, though. I have said all along, and I was saying this maybe 2 to 3 weeks ago. So I held on. I held on to the faith maybe a lot longer than other people. My thinking was, look, this is a really poor start. The Galaxy are going to start winning games, but you get Ricky Puig back in August, maybe. If you have 8 to 10 games to go, you win 7 or 8 of those. Maybe the Galaxy then sneak into the playoffs and they make a good run because they got a healthy, rested Ricky Puig. They're not going to make the playoffs. So now the Galaxy has a decision to make. Ricky Puig is under contract for a couple more seasons. Do you shut him down completely and say, let's not bring him back? Let's not try that at all. Or I think that probably the option is you bring him back and play him for 4 or 5 games, let him get his feet wet, let him get out there, run around a little bit. Because we saw this with Sebastian Lletget when he was here and he had a fractured foot, and they kept delaying his comeback and he wound up missing the entire season. And then the next preseason, by the time he came back, he hadn't played in like 15 months, and it was just too hard for him to get going again. I think Ricky comes back. I think he plays some games. The problem is the games may not be meaningful now.
No, I agree completely. And so I guess we can go ahead and cross Ricky Puig off the list of probably saving Greg Vanney's job at this point, because he just probably won't be able to play as many games as you would need to get them back in the playoffs. But one more question before I let you go, Kevin. You mentioned earlier about them discussing internally of maybe buying out Marco Royce. They really don't have a lot of funds right now. Do you see the team trying to make any moves this summer, any significant moves to maybe get a little, momentum in the summer, maybe try to turn things around? Or do you think they might just stand pat?
No, I mean, I think they could go both ways. I think they do try to add somebody because I think you want to get, if there's a player that you want and sort of a profile that you decided to get, and Will has had some real luck in signing guys in the summer. So he may go out and try to get guys if the guys are available to set up for next season. It wouldn't be to rescue this season, but to get set up for next season, and also just to sort of prove that he still has it. If he goes out and gets a guy, he knows when Ricky's coming back. I mean, it's sort of read between the lines. If he goes out and signs a guy in August and Ricky comes 2 weeks later and all of a sudden they win 5 or 6 games, people are going to say, oh, that Will Kuntz, man, look, he signed this guy in August and look at the team, the way they're playing. So I do think they go out and try to do something, but what they're going to be looking for shortly is whatever they do as far as moves go this year, they're going to start looking to 2026, I think. And they do have a lot of contracts that are coming up. They were really lucky after the MLS championship that they only had, I think, 1 or 2. Yoshida may have, and then some players they weren't going to bring back anyway. Some bench guys that their contracts were up. I think it was Brugman and Yoshida were the only top 15, 16 guys that had contracts coming up. That won't be the case next year. They'll have to make some decisions about some people, about some players, who they want to bring back and who not. So I do expect them to try to do something this summer, but obviously from a sort of situation of, if we don't get it done, that's fine. We'll take another shot at it in the winter. Not like we have to have that. With Marco Royce, when they signed him last year in August, that was the roll of the dice, to saying, this is the guy that's going to get us over the hump. He didn't have that much of an impact as they had hoped, but that was the idea of, this is the final piece for that MLS Cup championship team. That's not going to happen this summer.
I agree. Kevin, I appreciate you for coming on tonight. Before I let you go, where can the people find your work at?
They can find it at the LA Times, latimes.com. In fact, it's now Tuesday, and I have a column up going over many of the points that we just talked about with Greg Vanney and Will Kuntz and what's happening with the Galaxy. So latimes.com, and social media, it's kbaxter11.
Kevin, it's always a pleasure. It's crazy that this is how the first 4 months of the season turned out. I appreciate you for coming on, my friend. Until next time, guys, I will see you all soon.